Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. A quick reminder to support the broadcast if you want to continue to see it and listen to it. The best way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack, $5 a month or more, or $50 a year or more. We do private weekly chats with members only. I do a weekly roundup of the news and commentary for members only. And on occasion, we do live calls between past podcast guests and members as well, which later are recorded and put up behind the paywall. You can donate by buying me a coffee, sending money through Wise or Donor Box. You can purchase a consult with me, just if you want to just chat with me about expatriating or the meaning of life. And do check out this month's sponsor, the world's largest offshore event, the Expat Money Summit, which is taking place entirely online from October 7th to the 11th, put on by Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money show. He does good work. I've been on his show. He's been on my TNT radio program. At the summit, you'll learn why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve liberty and wealth. They'll be talking about crafting a plan B, getting multiple passports like myself. I've got 3, diversifying your finances, investing in international real estate, bug out locations, and getting in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. Most of the headline speakers, in fact, have been guests on Geopolitics and Empire. They include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, and I'm sure more will be joining as well. And there will be also VIP panels, and I will be on one of them to discuss World War III with Dave and Kyle from Anti-War and the Libertarian Institute. And you can, for all of this, it's all free, except for the VIP panel session, but you can get your complimentary free ticket by heading over to expatmoneysummit.com. The link is in the description. And so you'll be able to watch the live stream over those couple days for free. Do leave a podcast review. And joining us now is a fantastic guest. He's got a fantastic Substack and book that you want to buy, you want to read. It's in multiple languages. You can read it in English and Spanish and other languages. His name is Mees Baaijen. He writes at the Predators versus the People.substack.com. Welcome, Mees.
Hi, Roy. How are you?
Estoy bien. ¿Y cómo está usted?
Todo tranquilo aquí.
So yeah, I'm here in Mexico. You're down in Costa Rica, I believe. I was there many years ago. Very nice place. And again, your book is fantastic. Before getting into your material, if you could, whatever you'd like to tell about yourself and the work that you're doing of late. I understand that you've lived all over the planet.
Yeah, I was born in rural Holland. Simple life, farmer. My father was a reverend, but I was always on a farm, and then I studied veterinary medicine and always had an interest in developing countries. During my study, we organized events and studies, etc., and invited speakers with experience working in developing countries. And then after my study in 1978, I went out and with a few pauses, in Holland, I always, for the last 47 years, was early on in Africa, like 8 years, and then in Costa Rica, like 36 years, but also I spent almost a year in Peru and also in Portugal. And so, yes, I've had an international experience. Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, without understanding what really was going on all that time. That came only the last 10, 12 years.
And if you can tell us about that, your process. All of us at some point began to question many things. Myself in the early 2000s, and so if you want to tell us what was that process like of you starting to question things, and then in your book you describe how you began basically full-time researching this stuff, and that research is now available in your book.
Yeah. Well, the first time I had my big doubts and also made a decision was when I was 11 or 12 at the Cuba crisis. Uh, so there was a tremendous fear mongering going on in the whole of the United States and Europe, and we had leaflets hanging on the toilet. So that said, when there is an attack, a nuclear bomb attack, seek hidings under the table. You know, my parents had 7 children, so all of us under the table, supposedly put sandbags in the windows. There was no sand where we lived. And it was crazy and very, very frightening. And I said to my father, there can't be a God, otherwise he wouldn't allow this shit. And I'm not going to church anymore. So we had a big fight over many years, but finally settled. And yes, because of the study I did, I discovered that atheism is part of the secret war that has been waged against us for the last 500 years or so. And I started to dig into it after a friend gave me his version of 9/11, and both my wife and I thought that he was crazy. And but somehow he had arguments that were convincing, and so at some point about 10, 12 years ago, I took the bone and never let it go. So I've been under continuous studying.
Yeah, and 9/11
over 10 years. Yes, 9/11 was the trigger. Yeah.
For many of us, I've had on the podcast Richard Gage and Daniele Ganser. He's been twice on the podcast. He does fantastic work, and I'm happy that with 400 plus interviews on this podcast and hundreds more on my TNT show, I've been able to talk to virtually all of my intellectual heroes, from Daniele Ganser to you name it, William Engdahl. I've interviewed more than a half a dozen times, Dr. Paul Craig Robertson, all these people. And so your book, the reason I focus a lot on my podcast on the global elite, world governments, globalism, the technocracy, which I like to call algorithm ghetto. My past podcast guest, Edwin Black, that's his term. I really like that term, algorithm ghetto, for the digital gulag that they're building. And the reason I focus so much on these themes, on trying to understand what's happening, big picture, and trying to understand the elite, and having guests such as yourself from across the spectrum, from different cultures, different parts of Europe and the world. You're in Costa Rica, is to fill in the gaps. And I think for me, in doing so, by doing that, I hope I can find loopholes or a chink in the armor, a crack in the facade, where I have people like yourself who bring us unique insights that add things, insights that others haven't seen. And so you talk about Mafia. I like your term. I like how you've coined a new phrase, global mafia, and you say that this is a group of dynastic banking families not bound to any nation, religion, race, or ethnicity. And I actually agree with that. There are some of my listeners who get angry when I don't believe that it's the Jews, or some single group. And there's a guy called Mark Passio, who I recently listened to his 8-hour lecture, and he calls this the occultocracy. He used to be a Satanist and an occultist, and he left this secret society. And he says, like you say, so there's a number of us agreeing that this is a group that is above everyone. It's a moneyed power. I had Fadi Lama on recently, and he calls it the moneyed power. So if you want to tell us about your research, and who do you think is the they?
Okay. Yeah, I go back. The project that we are living under still started about 500 years ago, but the roots are much deeper. And then you go to Babylon and importantly also to Phoenicia. That is quite recent. The position of Phoenicia in this whole thing. We know all the Roman Empire, but the Phoenician Empire is not very well known, and it is much more alike what we have now than the typical army violence-based empire that there used to be. So these are all very well known, but the Phoenicians used trade, and they also had an aristocracy. They were the inventors of the purple dye made from animal snails of the Mediterranean Sea. And there are many Phoenician habits and traditions that are still in use, like last year when Charles was crowned, under his chair was a crowning stone, and that has a Phoenician origin. It's also used in Scandinavian because the Phoenicians went from coast to coast, more or less every 50 kilometers they had a city they controlled, and then they left to the Atlantic, visited England, visited northern Germany, Scandinavia, and if you see, for example, the Viking boat, it's a copy of the Phoenician boats, and the Phoenician boats are copies of Asian boats. Originally, the development started in Asia. And these Phoenicians were so powerful because they dominated the trade between Asia and the West. So that is silk and ceramics from China and spices and slaves and bullion and all these things. Yeah. So they gathered very large capitals and because they owned this trade. And 500 years ago, the Venetians and the people from the bankers from Genoa also controlled this same trade and also accumulated big capitals. And then you can do things that are not possible when you have an organic growth model. So the capital makes it possible to do extraordinary operations like the discovery of the world, the colonization of the world, that went in two phases. Well, maybe we can. Shall I go on, or do you have a question here?
Yeah, if you could just help us trace that history. As you said, this sort of really picked up about, say, 500 years ago, and you know, in your book, you provide again interesting insights that I haven't gotten from other books, and so you add, it's like an extra dimension in my mind, and something you brought up that I've also questioned is, I think up until 500 years ago, there's been sort of an organic development, right, of economies and peoples, and then you write in your book that the real important transition is not that from feudalism to capitalism, but from scattered to concentrated capitalist power. So basically, it's about 500 years ago. So would you say it was almost like, in some ways, I view this as this moment would have been inevitable on planet Earth, because if the planet is a finite globe, some of my flat Earth listeners will not be happy with me, but if the planet is a finite place, I think eventually over time, you're going to have it populated and there's going to become a monopolization and the centralization. And so just on that point, would you say about 500 years ago is the point where capital began to become concentrated, and so then these elite families and groups were able to then do what they're doing? Yes.
Well, there was, in fact, capital. In fact, the world has been globalized for let's say 5,000 years. Yes, and there were capital accumulations all over the place in Asia and earlier on in Asia. The capital accumulation in the Mediterranean, in Venice and Genoa, was more recent, about 600, 500 years ago. But there was a different factor in Europe that wasn't present in the other areas. And that's why Europe became the, what's the term, the monstrous former of the world. The formation, I'm looking for the word, the shaper of the monstrous shaper of the world. That's a phrase coined by Fernand Braudel, which was one of the most famous French historians in the last century. And the other phrase about from scattered to concentrated capital is from Giovanni Arrighi. Arrighi was a student of Braudel, and they both describe this project, but in other terms. So when you're not aware that this project exists and you read their books, they write about capitalism. But once you become an insider, then you understand that what they really describe is this project. And Braudel said it literally when he explained how the economy works. He said there is a basic level of subsistence economy. Above that, you have a transparent level of trade between even globalized trade. And above that, you have the anti-market, where the predators roam and the law of the jungle governs. That was Braudel 60, 70 years ago. He understood this. But none of his readers have made the connection to the global domination project. And I think my book is the first on this subject to include these mainstream historians. So it's also called, you can have an esoteric reading or an exoteric reading of them. If you read them exoterically, like non-insiders do, you see one project, and if you read them esoterically because you have inside information, then you understand that we're talking about exactly the same project. And so that builds up evidence and the burden of proof for this project. Yeah, and the factor that was different in Europe was the nations started to appear and to be stimulated, and that was not a coincidence, a total coincidence. That was also manipulated. There was a German king, Frederick Barbarossa. Hitler used his name for his attack on Russia, and Barbarossa wanted to create a big empire in Europe to end the wars that were constantly plaguing Europe. And he was in Germany, and he wanted to integrate Italy, and he did several attempts, but in the end he failed because the Pope went with the merchants, who were against this because it would be a loss of their power. Before that, the merchants took control of this rich trade east-west. You had only two powers basically in Europe: the aristocracy and the church. and the merchants had very little political influence. And that is the big change that came with the accumulation of capital that Arrighi noted as the essential starting point. And then the fact that it couldn't be a big empire, but was going to be split up in smaller units that were more easy to manipulate by the bankers. And the bankers are the merchants who got rich in the trade and then started banking. And the first country where they discovered how enormously powerful the banking activities were in a country was when the bankers from Genoa started to control Spain. I think more or less by accident, but there they learned the trick. They learned the trick how they could steer almost with a remote control the biggest empire at that moment, Spain. And they financed Spain to do the discoveries, Columbus, etc. And they financed Spain to colonize the Americas and some other, or large parts of the Americans and some other countries like the Philippines and so. Yeah, that's the template. That's the template. So you are mafia, you are organized crime, you need proxies. You aren't going to do that yourself. So the proxy is a country. And gradually, all countries have been made proxies. And to oversee all these proxies, they had their hegemons. So that is the world leader. And it started with Spain. And then in the 17th century, it went to Holland. They financed Holland to colonize in Asia, Indonesia, etc. And then it became Britain. So this concentrated capital moved from the Mediterranean to Holland, from Holland to Britain. And Marx, when he was writing his book Das Kapital, saw it already going from Britain to the United States, and he understood this project, and he never elaborated on it, and he focused on a class struggle between capital industrialists, so industrial capital owners and laborers. But in fact, that's a very visible conflict, yeah. But in fact, the conflict is hidden, and it's between the bankers and humanity.
So I think this is important for people to understand. So thousands of years of human history, the capital finally begins to accumulate with this glafia, as you call them, global mafia. And that includes, again, people from all walks. And in your book, again, you do detail that it does tend to concentrate with certain groups of people and families. And so then they start to build these empires through their proxies, and these are cycles, right? So these economies and empires will grow and then collapse. I view it as waves, where you have one wave, it goes up and then it collapses, and then subsequently you'll get a second bigger wave, and then it'll collapse, and then a third even bigger wave. And so that, as you mentioned, that money capital is moving from empire to empire. Each empire seems subsequently to be bigger and better. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. Now the money is moving to the east, to Brics and multipolarity, to Russia and China. We can get to that later. My question is, do you feel that, I feel that now the whole planet has been almost covered now, and the technology basically has allowed them to it feels like we're in the cusp of what Aldous Huxley called the final revolution, the world empire, world government. Do you feel that we are in the cusp of a time where this moneyed power will make the entire planet a world empire or world government?
Yeah, I think we have a world government for a long time already. but it's not de jure. How you say it in English? It's de facto. Yeah, it's factual, but it's not official. Yeah. So they didn't control all countries 500 years ago. That went step by step. But by the end of the 17th century, they had. You can measure this by looking at where are the central banks. Yeah. So they had an experiment with a central bank in Venice. Then in 1608 or 9, they had the first central bank in Holland. Then in 1694, they had the Bank of England, and they went to Hamburg and to Sweden, etc. And each time they control a country, they set up a central bank that is controlled by the top bankers, often Rothschild bankers. I think they still are, together with Rockefeller and other families. So that is like the seal on the deal they have with the local elites, because they buy the local elites, they corrupt them. If necessary, they blackmail them. Jeffrey Epstein, etc., fits in this scheme. And then, it's not only the government you have to infiltrate. So it's a fusion between capital, international capital, and local government that has been going on for a long time. And then, you can, when you have this system put in place with a pseudo-democracy, pseudo-democracy underwritten by laws, like they did this in England in 1680, what was it, 88? I think there was the Glorious Revolution. And then you had the Bill of Rights, It was no longer the God-given rights that we have. Now there was now a Bill of Rights which protected these bankers. So they install a pseudo-democracy. They install a legal system which protects them, and of course they install their corporations which are intertwined with the government, and then the banking system. And the banking system is now everywhere. After the attack on Libya, one of the first things they did was again a central bank. When the first revolution took place by Mafia, or steered by Mafia and Wall Street, with Sun Yat-sen in 1912, immediately a central bank. That is now a total coverage. A few countries are still brought in the line, have still to be brought in line, but it's the same in China and Russia too. International capital is fused in those countries with the local elites, and these local elites, several American presidents spoke of them as sons of bitches, but our sons of bitches. That's the international elite.
Yeah, I want to get to Russia and China in a bit, but I've had John Perkins, the economic hitman, on the podcast, and he's what his work, what he used to do again for the IMF and the World Bank for this system. He would go country by country, bribe the leaders. I think he went to Panama and Ecuador, and get them to sell out their country to plug their nation into this system, and then if they didn't go along, they would be killed. And then they would just keep pressing on. And even here in Mexico, there's examples. You got Banxico, the Bank of Mexico, and Mexican billionaire Hugo Salinas Price, who's created Electra, Banco Azteca. He's in his 90s now, but he was a very Austrian school type of guy, sound money. and his bank sells silver ounces, which I've purchased from, and he got a lot of support with Mexican politicians to introduce a law that would make these silver Libertad ounces legal tender, which would allow for the people to maintain their purchasing power, right? To beat inflation from these fiat fake currencies that we all use. But the Bank of Mexico was always against it. And that's an example of, as what you say, the Bank of Mexico is linked to the Federal Reserve and the Bank of International Settlements. And so that system, so it's not independent. So I'm sure the Bank of Mexico was told by the Federal Reserve and the rest of them, no, you cannot allow that. And again, the health emergency of the past few years, I think, really opened my eyes, where I discovered where I am at the municipal level, at the state level, and the national level. Our local governments here, we don't have a government. It's being run by the Mafia, as you say. I've found the local government documents which show that virtually a lot of the policies that we're living in the local level here in Mexico are being financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. I've got the actual documents. Rockefeller Foundation, UN, international banks, international institutions. So we don't have any sovereignty. We're being run by this public-private partnership that's been around, as you say, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And just one more point, I think it's important for me, interesting, this idea of democracy and nations. I'm a Christian, and I still believe in the biblical term. The Bible uses nations, and I view that as having always existed. Like it's a reference to people groups or cultural ethnicities that have been around. Those are the nations. But these formalized structures that we have now, I think, are a sham. You write in your book, you quote, modern democracy is based on a hidden oligarchy, and they own the planet by creating nations and then controlling them via proxies. And there's another author I hope to get on. I talk with him. He's a German theologian called Martin Erdmann. And for me, the way to world government is through nation states. Because if you had monarchies, you can't have a world government, because you've got different mini empires or monarchies that will always fight with each other. So the only way to have a world government is to get rid of those monarchies and types of systems and create nation states. And then you'll have the 190 plus nation states will be plugged in, and you'll create a world federation. For me, that's like the way towards world government. Any thought on that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the conclusion of my book, and it's also the conclusion of the historians we just mentioned, like Brodel and Arrighi. Yeah, the fusion of the central point is the fusion of international capital with local government. Or local, I mean national government. So they work through countries. So the anarchists were right when they said that the state was the source of all problems, because the state, in many cases, has been controlled for hundreds of years already. And in Spain, they started with Spain. That was over 500 years ago. But they couldn't work well with the Catholic Spain, so they manipulated the Reformation. So these new countries they started to work with, Holland and England, were Protestant. When this Mafia crime cabal started to work with them, but that was planned. That was not everything, probably. There were also some spontaneous stuff, actions. Maybe Luther did it on his own when he nailed the 95 theses on the church door, etc. But soon he had a handler. That's described by Webster Tarpley. That's also a very interesting researcher who I refer to in my book. he understood very well the Venetian cycle of this project, and there are others like Quigley that understood well the British American cycle of this project, and yes. Where were we on?
If I could ask you then, the EU, because I'm also a EU citizen like yourself. I'm a Croatian national, and I think it's also an important topic of the EU because I view that as the blueprint, or maybe another version or iteration of their latest blueprint for creating this totalitarian, anti-democratic, technocratic world government, because I see it like a laboratory where they've created this supranational structure. And it's interesting because, again, you talk about in your book Freemasons and the founding of America. And it's interesting that George Washington, there's a quote I discovered from 200 plus years ago where George Washington discussed the creation of a United States of Europe. And you talk about these different revolutions that were planned, and I agree with you. The French Revolution by these secret societies, American Revolution, and now the EU was, yeah, and the EU. There's academic papers that show how the EU 50+% of the process of EU integration from the 40s and 50s onward was financed by the CIA and State Department, I think, and so. For me, the EU is a blueprint because it's becoming a technocratic dystopia, digital currencies, digital passports, and they are now financing all other regions. You have ASEAN, the Southeast Asian Union, which is a copy of the EU. And something that I have not heard anyone talk about, you have a lot of people who will say, oh, look at Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. He's fighting the system. Or people will look at AMLO, López Obrador, here in Mexico. And, they do some good things that help sovereignty. But at the end of the day, these guys are globalists because AMLO, last couple of years, he has literally said, we should copy the EU and create a North American Union. Bukele last year said, literally, he said, we should copy the EU and create a Central American Union. And then you've got the South American leaders like Rafael Correa, ex-Ecuador president. He said in an interview 1 or 2 years ago, he said, we should copy the EU and have a South American Union. Eurasia is doing that. Putin and my former employer, Nursultan Nazarbayev, they are pushing the Eurasian Union. And so your thoughts on the EU and what is important for you when it comes to the European Union?
Yeah. Before I get to the EU, maybe let me try to recap the big picture. What happened in those 500 years? So there is this banking elite which has this plan. They start working with Spain. They finance Spain to colonize America, large parts of America. They leave Spain, go to Holland, colonize large parts of Asia. Then the British Empire, another colonization. And that phase where they colonize the countries that I call in my book the low-hanging fruit, the easy-to-catch low-hanging fruit, that was more or less finished in 1914. That's the year the First World War started. And but there was still Eurasia. And Eurasia had very powerful empires. You had Japan, you had China, you had Russia, you had the Austrian-Hungary Empire, you had the European colonial empires, Britain. Yeah. So how could they level the play field in Eurasia and eliminate all these traditional structures that they didn't want there, because they want a level play field where nobody stops them. And EU is one of these structures, of course. So what did they do? They organized the world wars. And that is what many people still don't know. and that the world wars were organized by a consortium formed by the British Empire and the American, the outgoing British Empire and the upcoming American Empire. They started to plan this 60 years before the First World War. There is already a book where this is described called The New Rome. And so they set up their boogeyman. Hitler is one of their boogeymen. Hitler was set up by the Americans and the British. And that is very well documented and will come out in a new book of by a friend of mine, and a very respected author. I can't give details now, but it is incredible how the American elites not only so they headhunted Hitler, they picked him out, they interviewed him, they trained him for 15 years, and this was done by high elite Americans. So the trainer of Hitler during 15 years was an American of German origin, Ernst Hanfstaengl, and he wrote the canción, how you call it, the songs for Nazi Germany. He wrote the songs, and he taught Hitler how he had to present his speeches and all kinds of things. Incredible story. This was done by the Americans. This was done by the British, not by the people, but by the proxies. The proxies and the Zionists, of course. We haven't mentioned them yet, but when we say it started in the Mediterranean, the Jews were already part of this game, of this criminal game. Yeah, which Jews? The ones that were banned from Spain. Probably the ones that had foreknowledge and left before the big problems in Spain came to surface with the Inquisition, and so they left. Several of them went to Venice. For example, the Warburg family had this trajectory, and they went then to northern Germany to do their thing there. Yeah, all part of the same project. And they organized the Glorious Revolution in England also, and the Cromwell Revolution in England, so they could use Britain as their proxy. So the EU was formed after the world wars, because they said, yes, there is so much nationalism in the world, etc., and that leads to wars, etc. So we need a union. Yeah, totally false story, because they themselves had instigated and organized these wars. And so, yeah, these are all instruments they use to increase their control.
For many years, I was just going to add, for many years, a lot of us have, especially Americans, have pondered, like, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we've all seen General Wesley Clark in an interview he gave over 10, 15 years ago, where he says in 2001 at the Pentagon, he was told with the documents that there was a plan. I mean, when you have I think he was former NATO Supreme Commander, he was a presidential candidate, Wesley Clark, tell you that in 2001, for no reason, that the U.S. is going to invade 7 Middle Eastern countries that had nothing to do with anything. Like, I don't understand why. I used to work in international relations and academia, and people still carry on with these official narratives and the media today. And I don't understand. Like, we literally have a confession that says we're just going to knock out Sudan and Syria and Libya and Yemen and Iran for no reason. And it's initially it becomes not clear why they just go in and blow up the place and leave. But then, as what you're saying, it makes sense because they destroy I think the traditional religions and family structures and infrastructure. They create total chaos, and then as you say, they can come in, loot the place, establish central banks, and then they can reintegrate these nations or structures into these new supranational regional groups that they've created. I mean, look at the case of the former Yugoslavia, where my parents were born in Croatia, and the former Yugoslavia that was destroyed, and then all those broken pieces were reintegrated into the European Union. And I feel like that model might be used here in North America, where we might have a second civil war, or the migration crisis and climate crisis and narco crisis. All of these could form the basis for some sort of balkanization event, which will be pushed us into a North American Union. And so the war aspect, if I could ask you maybe now, this idea of a third world war, do you think they're going to try again? Because we see the West, or this Western faction of the Mafia seeming to start escalating. It's like they want to start another conflict with the East. Do you think they're going to start a war as the same strategy they've used before?
Okay. Again, I will try to recap a little bit. We have these cycles: Spain, Holland, England, America, and now going to China. Yeah. So all these changes of cycles were always accompanied by wars, and these wars, the war in Ukraine, and I think also what is happening in the war in Gaza is part of it. And the people, the leaders of the West, know that their task is finished, and that they will be sidelined, as they did with Spain, with Holland, etc., etc. They know it. In 2019, Macron spoke to his ambassadors, and he said, the Western hegemony is finished. 5 years ago. Yeah, they know it all. But they agreed with the Russians, because they're all gangsters, Putin too. They agreed, let's do a game of American wrestling. Yeah, and that's the war we have now. And it doesn't interest them at all how many people die. The more, the better. I think is what they what they see. They want to depopulate Ukraine. Apparently, it's all senseless. I mean, if you really wanted a constructive solution, then you had to declare long ago Ukraine a neutral country. Yeah, but they play the game, and Russia played the game with them. I mean, it can't be that Russia is so naive. I mean, everybody understood that it was a game, that they were trying to challenge Russia and get closer and get closer and saying stupid things like NATO did when this Norwegian, what they called it, piece of Norwegian wood. What's his name again? Stoltenberg said, yeah, if Russia wants NATO farther away, we put it closer, and like children. And so it's American, and they get rich of it. Not only the Americans, the Russians also. All people involved in weapon business, China, North Korea, and so on, have large profits from this. It's not a real war. I mean, it's a pseudo war. not a real war it's a real war in the sense that hundreds of thousands of young men, especially Ukrainians, but also Russians, die. Yeah, but that is not of interest. That they did the same in the First World War, in the Second World War. If you understand that they have done this before, then you better understand what they're doing now. Yeah, they're it's the total banality of evil. You know.
But do you think? I totally agree with you. Do you think though that we're at a certain threshold or level of the current war in Ukraine, and people are dying, but it's at a certain degree or level, and in Gaza, a lot of people are dying, and so do you think though that they're going to keep it at this sort of low level? Again, we're comparing to past wars that were at a much higher level in terms of body count and death and destruction. Do you think they'll just keep it at this sort of lower level that will be able to serve their purposes, or do you think they'll do something like World War I or World War II, where, because we're starting to see countries now introduce conscription. My country of Croatia next year is bringing back conscription. I'm probably too old, but even if I'm not, I said, there's no way I'm going to go die in some globalist war. Come find me here in Mexico. But many countries are bringing in conscription. We saw in UK, the Rishi Sunak say, if you Englishmen or women, if you're conscripted and you don't want to die in our wars, we'll turn off your banking, freeze your bank account, turn off your driver's license. It's absolutely insane. But do you think that they will sort of escalate and we'll have another world war where millions or tens of millions die?
Yes, that's very probable, but I see a few strange things that do not add up. Yeah. One is that the Russians now, but also the Yemenites, they have these ultra supersonic missiles, and the Americans don't have them. I mean, that's no logic at all in this. I mean, the Americans have always been the technological leaders. Would they be so far behind now? I don't believe the story. I don't believe the story. I think they have them, but they do not want to use them because they want to protect, how you say, to slow. I mean, it shouldn't be a war where somebody could win and then there was peace. No, that's not what they want. They want a constant grinding war. That's one point. And the other point is there is weaponry that is between the traditional weaponry and atomic weaponry. That is the EMP weaponry, the electromagnetic pulse. That's incredibly effective. One big electromagnetic pulse bomb. It's a nuclear. There's nuclear energy behind it, but one of these big bombs on the center of the U.S. and the whole country will be paralyzed. Not only paralyzed, but all electronic infrastructure will be destroyed, burned. It burns. Yeah. It can also happen through natural phenomena. There was one in the Carrington event. You can look it up. Already in the 1860s, burned telegraph wires and everything in the society we have, which they say is resilient, but it's anti-resilient totally, because it completely depends on electrical energy and electronics. I mean, they're not, as long as they do not use these kind of things, I would say it's American wrestling. It's not, it's a war for the public, yeah, but it's they agree on warring, yeah, and to a certain point, like attacks from Ukraine on Russia benefit Putin and his oligarchs because it's fear for the population and more support for his war. Yeah, so they are probably. I can't even imagine that they're asking or secretly send us a few more drones because the population. This is totally manipulated. But it's totally the banality of a kind of evil that is unimaginable.
And I'd agree with you. And so many people have asked, like, this is the only conclusion that you can come to. I've interviewed people from around the world, and you see many Russian patriots begin to question their own Russian government, saying, like, none of this makes sense from an organic point of view. If this was a real war, many things differently would have been done differently, and the same in the West. So it's like the only conclusion an outside observer can come to is, as you say, like, both of them, all of the parties are in on it and gaining benefit. As you said, the collective Kremlin, as Yuri Roshka likes to say, they, a few drone strikes into Russian territory will, give them more, will increase the nationalism among the populace and have people rally around, the troops. And so on that question of, in your Substack, you posted recently an article about the incorporation of the China into the global power structure. This issue of Brics multipolarity, I just can't buy it. And there's a portion of alternative media and mainstream that are hyping up multipolarity as some alternative. But then you look at the history. Brics was coined by this young Indian lady, that term. She was a World Economic Forum young global leader. She and Jim O'Neill, Goldman Sachs, coined that term Brics. And then my view is that Brics and multipolarity is just a continuation of what you were describing earlier. It's like the old system has died and it's just the latest operating system. And it's bringing into the fold all of the global South countries, kind of as you mentioned, all of those nations are being brought into this new system. They're joining rapidly. And this system is more technocratic. It's more advanced in technocracy. And so, Putin even talked about a BRICS parliament the other day. So this might become like the new United Nations World Organization. And these countries, Russia and China, they're all the same types of oligarchies as in the West. They've all implemented these controls, especially during the health emergency, the QR codes, the forced injections, the digital passports, digital currencies. And so, and sometimes when you talk with some of these people who hype up BRICS and multipolarity and Putin and Xi Jinping are so wonderful, they completely ignore all of these bad things. And even in Russia and China, there's persecution of dissidents and people who speak out, and that same. Again, I'm not here. I view them; they're all bad guys. I'm not here saying Russia, China bad, and the West is not. It's like, no, the West does the same thing. My own government banned me from PayPal. And that same stuff happens in Russia and China. And so, just your thoughts on this whole BRICS multipolar story, and then where Russia and sort of China and the rest of them fit in.
Okay, yeah. You already mentioned the article series I've started. I have a piece on the history of Russia, and to explain that Russia is exactly the same as mentioned earlier. There's a fusion between international capital and the Russian government, and the oligarchs are in fact the ones that have that steer that have the strings, but behind the oligarchs are the big bankers dynasties. Yeah, so there is a book by Michael Wolski about the fall of the German of the wall in 1989, and he says they started to prepare this operation of the oligarchs years before the end of the Soviet Union. So they choose them, they finance them, etc. And in fact, they are not the owners of these wells. These few ultra-rich families at the top, they are the owners. The oligarchs are proxies. That they are, of course, allowed to live lives in luxury with yachts and everything. But that's the system. That's the system. And you see in China, it's very much the same. And let's then have a look at, for example, Brazil. Yeah.
If I could just add before Brazil, I mean, there was an interview I saw recently. Khodorkovsky, the Russian oligarch, he literally said in an interview, he was a Rothschild man. He literally said that in an interview recently, that he was a proxy of the Rothschilds. And I've had on a wonderful Peruvian researcher. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Miklos Lucas. I don't know if he was teaching in academia in Britain. I don't know if he's still there or in Peru. I'm going to have to get him back on. But in our discussion, you look at how China was opened up. I'm sure you talk about this in your writing, but we all know the Nixon Kissinger opening up of China. But Miklos made a point how in the 1990s you had Bill Gates and Microsoft penetrate the market, and China established Microsoft AI in the centers in the 90s, and that Hu Jintao, I think the then president, when he visited the U.S., instead of going, Hu Jintao, the head of state of China, to visit his first stop being the White House, his first stop was to visit Bill Gates in Seattle, and so that tells you where the real power is. And so they've established, Patrick Wood and many others. I think we can see now that the technocracy, Anthony Sutton and many other people, China has been, Mao, they talk about how he was a Yale man. There's mainstream articles about, Yale, Skull and Bones, Mao Zedong. Yeah. And so it's like China has been grafted in, and in some ways they are like the laboratory prototype advancing these technologies, which then are used everywhere else. And again, I don't think it's not China is not there may be the boogeyman, but they're not the people. They're not the source of this, right? It's this global glafia. But Brazil, you were saying,
yeah. I mean, have a look at all the. If you look at the other Brics countries, it's the same everywhere. Like Brazil, and more in general terms, the countries of Latin America, including Mexico, they were supposedly liberated in the early 1800s. Yeah, they became independent, but that's a false story because they became independent from Spain, but they became dependent on financing by British Empire. Yeah, all the railroads, all the infrastructure, all these exploitation of mines and riches. The international capital is behind it, and they are dependent. They have been dependent ever since. So the same fusion between international capital, etc. So if you then expect that when you put these countries together, that they are then following an anti-globalist course, that's totally bonkers. I mean, never. Each of them is controlled since long. In the case of Mexico and Brazil, since 200 years.
I've had on Jefferson Morley, who wrote a fantastic book called Our Man in Mexico, and he declassified the documents which are available at National Security Archive. on how multiple Mexican presidents were literally CIA agents with the codename Litempo. And so it's kind of just as you're saying, I'm just curious, how do you sort of rationalize in your mind where we will see like an AMLO come out and, you know, he says we should have there's a tweet with him and Jeremy Corbyn in 2016 saying we want a world government. And, you know, AMLO says we want a North American union, but at the same time, he will criticize, you know, intervention and that sort of thing. Do you think people like AMLO are in on it? They know what's going on, or are they useful idiots, or a mix of both?
Well, yeah, heads of state, they yeah, they know the game. I'm sure. In the case of AMLO, the same friend that set me on 9/11 is he has a lot of experience as a CEO in big companies in Latin America. He has told me incredibly positive stories about what AMLO has been doing in Mexico, which I haven't been able to study yet. But well, now you tell me about it. We can have more exchange about that after this interview. What's really happening there? Yeah, I thought it could be an exception, which would undermine my theory that there are no exceptions. Every country is now owned. It's all a theater. There is this quite recently a North Korean missile was found and opened, and it's full of American and Western parts. I mean, North Korea, William Engdahl, you have had him on the show, you said, William has written about this. North Korea is another vassal state of America. And America is the still present hegemon of the Mafia. I see no exceptions, and the only one I had doubts about was Mexico. But what you are telling me is confirming what.
Yeah, my only my way of understanding is that AMLO is in on it, but I think that there are different degrees of these puppets or globalists where some of them are maybe more extreme and psychopathic, and others are maybe more humane globalists where AMLO is like, okay, he's just maybe trying to carve out the best seat at the table for his people, because, you know, we've seen him defend energy sovereignty. He's been anti-GMO, and so that's my only explanation. So he's still a globalist. He's still, you know, he's at the table where the pie is being carved up of world government. But maybe as opposed to other leaders like you know, in Canada or UK or Germany and Europe, where they're more psychopathic and they have no
blatantly,
right. They have no. They're like, we're just gonna kill our citizens. Like, we're not even gonna pretend. We're just gonna euthanasia in Canada. Sign up, people, kill yourself. And in Mexico, my explanation is AMLO is, you know, maybe as, and in many cases they have no choice. Like, this is the name of the game. This is the rules of the game. At least, you know, maybe I can get better conditions for my people. That's my only explanation. And I do want to ask you, you talk about this in your book. One of my favorite topics, not by choice, is the CBDC stuff, the digital technocracy, the digital IDs. I see them pushing us towards this in all countries. EU, I just read this week, is piloting now in 5 countries their new vaccine passport. And this system, I mean, this will be permanent tyranny forever, and there will be total control of our lives. Once we get digital IDs with the smartphones and digital currencies and surveillance and everything, paying with your palms and biometrics and face payments, this will restrict all people of all nations travel, whether you can drive a car, whether you can take a bus or a plane or leave your city or state or country, if you can work, what, the food that we can buy, the carbon tracking systems. I mean, this is total hell on earth. I just see them progressing with it. Some of us have already been experiencing the consequences of this. Like I said, I'm banned from some platforms. Some people are being banned from banking. With the health emergency, you were fired if you didn't do what they said, right? Your thoughts on this digital insane control system?
Okay. Well, if you see it in the big picture, they started working with proxies and setting up a proxy infrastructure in each country. But that's government, that's the media, that's the academia, corporations, etc. It has become a very complicated and convoluted control infrastructure. Yeah. And since long they've planned a different control system technology. And if you like Brzezinski, the advisor of the American government, his book on the between two ages on the technocratic society already mentions the coming of a system that of total surveillance databases, etc., etc., etc. That's almost 55 years ago. Yeah, that they announced it. They were already working on it, of course, and that was exactly a task of the American Silicon Valley to produce the technology that could be used for this, while they sold it to us as for our benefit. Yeah, cell phones, everything. So it was in the same or early 70s, last century. You had Gary Allen, who wrote his very successful book, Nobody Dares Call It a Conspiracy. He said already, we are building our own prison. And that's all these 5G and all these new, faster, etc. stuff. It's a CBDC, it's all for our own prison, our own digital prison. So that aims to have a simple, centralized control infrastructure. You don't have to work with ideologies, which was, of course, also very important to keep people under control. You can do it this way. So you can block their bank account, block their movements by excluding them from public transport or even stop their cars. That's also coming. And they have their hopes on that. But I'm still. I think it could be another case of the emperor's clothes, where the emperor passes nude and everybody applauds his beautiful clothes until a child says, "But he's nude," and that I mean, we have just a week ago. There was a very small glitch in the Microsoft software that caused paralysis and chaos on thousands of airports worldwide. I mean, it was relatively easy to solve, but imagine that a little EMP bomb or another kind of sabotage, and the whole thing comes apart. I mean, people then realize that with CBDC, you can't buy anything, you can't sell anything, as long as the CBDC isn't put to work again after a calamity. So that is inevitable that these calamities will surge for different reasons. Could be natural reasons, another EMP event, or sabotage of or anything. It's very, very vulnerable, very delicate.
So
And
yeah,
caused,
so we have hope there then, yes, because it is very precarious. I mean, just 2 nights ago, my internet was not working for many hours, and always things are failing, phones and computers and these systems, and so it's very precarious. And so, thoughts on how to, what do we do? Do we just continue speaking out? Do we also make? My response is twofold. We need to speak out, not comply. And I don't have all the solutions. People sometimes look to me too much for solutions. I'm living my life and I do what I can. But people should have different reactions. There are some people who want to get into politics. I don't. But if someone wants to work on that solution, go ahead at the local level or larger. But we try to resist, but I also want to have a fallback in case that they do advance. I should have a farm like you do in Costa Rica, where you have food and water, where at least if they shut off in the meantime, my access to food, I can feed myself. So the thoughts on, are they going to advance, or what do we do in the face of this Glafia madness?
Yeah. I think the principal point is awareness, because you can go in politics and start a fight, but you're against a majority that thinks you're crazy. So that's a very bad position to start with. I mean, they are strong on so many points. The rot is so generalized that fighting the system directly is almost impossible. So, but you can, of course, we have to resist. But apart from that, I think awareness is important. That's why I wrote my book, and that's why I hope that people in the education in educational institute will pick things up, so we can have a narrative that most people agree upon of what was history and how has it brought us here. Because all our children are fed the lies that we have also been fed. Nothing has changed there. And but to be honest, I have had very little response from people in the educational world. I thought maybe people from homeschooling or so would contact me, but it hasn't happened yet. So if you are in it, then for the listeners, and if you are in it, then please contact me to see what can be done. Yeah, and a very important thing is that that's part of the awareness project, that people rediscover their how I could say their spiritual or religious roots, that we are not the product of some random process in some primordial probably stinking soup somewhere, but we do not come from below, we come from above. There is this world was designed, and there was a creator who realized this, and it is all very mysterious and miraculous. But if you once you believe through what you have been taught at school, that you have no free will, that you're just a meat robot, that you can be hacked to become a better human being, then you're lost. I mean, then that from that moment you are the ball they play with. Yeah, so we have to go back to our spiritual roots, that rediscover where we come from and why we are here on Earth.
And in the beginning portion of your book, you discussed that, and yeah, I think it's clear. I mean, the whole evolution, Darwin, atheist thing, it makes no sense. I mean, come on, people, if you just look at like your human body, the trees, you talk about this, the complexity, how does this stuff self-assemble? It makes no sense whatsoever. There's there's microevolution, but macroevolution. I can put together vegetables on a table. They're not going to self-assemble into a salad, and so there has to be a creator for the creation. At least that's common denominator, something we should all agree. And this whole social Darwinist idea, it makes no sense. And as you say, if you believe that, then we become pawns in their game. Do you think? I do want to just step back a moment. Well, just one more point. Do you think then, for any preparations, do you think it's wise for people to become more independent, so we can be less controlled by these systems? So and what does that look like? Does that mean getting out of cities, or is there a way you could still live in a city and be more independent? And any thoughts?
No, in a city you are totally dependent. They've worked for hundreds of years to make us totally dependent for food on their big companies. They are rooting out the small farms and the medium farms, and so the only thing which will be available in the future is food from their farms, and yeah, you are so incredibly vulnerable when you live in a city where you have to buy all your food. I mean, the collapse of the electronic payment system after the CBDC has become standardized is can be fatal. And it gives them an enormous power, much more than they had before, when there was a debt slavery, just debt slavery. You have now also like pay slavery, or with CBDC you would have a total pay slavery. They can block your account, they can block the whole system, and you can't do anything. You can't buy anything, you can't sell anything.
And
so yeah, the logical thing would be go back to the countryside and have produce at least part of your food. But of course, I've been thinking about this, like here in Costa Rica. We are very close to this San Jose, the main city, maybe 2 million people. If they're all hungry and we are at a few kilometers, they will go to the country to see if there's food. My mother did this in the Second World War. She went on a bicycle with, I described it in the book, on a bicycle with wooden wheels to see if she could buy or get some food at the farms. The farmers were not having hunger problems. The people from the city were, but the concentration of people in cities is so enormous now. It's probably like 80% of the world population is living in big cities. It's very high. So this dependency is very advanced.
Yeah, I see it here. It is something like 70 to 80%, or at least that's what they want. the globalists, they write their white papers and they're saying this. I mean, that's their goal, to put us into these on these farms, these 15-minute cities. And I live in the second biggest city in Mexico, and I want to get out. I'm trying to conspire to scheme to at least get out of the city. But as you say, I mean, there's only so much that one can do. So you're on the outskirts of San Jose for your farm, and you do the best that you can with what you got where you're at, and just continue on with life. You can't control whether there's a collapse and people come to your farm to pillage. I mean, if it comes to that, it comes to that. There's nothing more that you can do, and we just have to deal with things as they come. I do want to ask you about the COVID situation, the pandemic. Just your quick thoughts. This idea of biological warfare. What do you think that was really all about? I'm of the opinion from the beginning, I have not changed my opinion from early 2020, that the primary goal was to install this algocracy, this algorithm ghetto, this digital technocracy. For me, I view that was the pretext to install the control system. And so just real quick, what do you think? And your thought on eugenics? Do they want to drastically lower the population? So your thought on what COVID was, and then do you think they're going to keep trying that again? They're talking about the bird flu now.
There was a plan for the 20th century of wars, etc., to control all these Eurasian empires. Yeah, they prepared it far in advance, and now with our 21st century, there is again a plan. All lands are already under control, but now they want to get all people under control, under technological control. Yeah, that's the new infrastructure. And 9/11 was certainly like an opening salvo or an overture, if you in musical terms, like the First World War was, or Sarajevo, the assassination of Ferdinand, or Franz Ferdinand. That was 9/11, and COVID is clearly prepared for with earlier attempts with other viruses, which could be stopped. But in this case, it went on, and it didn't go very well for them, I think. I mean, it's too much is coming to light, and it can't be wiped eternally under the carpet. What's now happening, and you see it also appearing in mainstream media. Yeah, these vaccinations are incredibly dangerous, while the virus was not so incredibly dangerous. I think there was a virus. I mean, when you hear the doctors who were in the emergency rooms, etc., they started seeing some different symptoms and characteristics of this disease. It was not like the earlier flus, although in the end the mortality of COVID was not much higher of the flus, but the flus could also do it. I mean, in a country like Holland, there could be what is it? Extra mortality. The word above the normal expected level
excess
of 20,000 people in the case of the flu. And now in this case it was more or less the same. And they probably, they overplayed their hand. Is that English? They did it too early, and they hadn't the things ready, like the ID. But the next time they will have the things ready, and they are trying to do it again now with this bird flu. But there is nothing happening. I read Meryl Nass, and she's talking about 14 cases and no hospitalizations and no death in the whole U.S. There's nothing. There's nothing to see there. But they're trying it, and they are allowing for the vaccines, and it's a totally corrupt system since long before COVID. The pharmaceutical industry. Others have written about this years earlier.
Yeah, I want to ask you. You were in Moldova not long ago at the Chisinau Forum. I spoke virtually last year, and as well as this time. And Yuri Roshka, he's he's being politically persecuted, and he might go to jail for many years. And I sort of see this as something that might become universal. Again, this we didn't really touch on this, but this aspect of the censorship and the Orwellian 1984 state of things, and how our governments, Department of Homeland Security, Pentagon, NATO, EU, that they are now beginning to classify thought and speech criminal. So if you say simple, banal, like simple things that disagree with the official diktats of Brussels or Washington, you can be fined or go to jail. And that seems to be what's happening with Yuri Roshka. And then the same thing can happen to, as time goes on, to any of us anywhere, as we've seen in Canada, in the US, other examples in Europe. And any thought on your trip, how your participation in Chisinau, and what you think is happening to Yuri, and if you think in the future they'll be able to do this to yourself or myself.
Yeah, well, an expression used is that the glove is coming, the velvet glove is coming from the iron fist. Yeah. This whole project is totally fascist. Yeah, and fascist means that everything is subjected, or everything. Yeah, there's no respect for life, for liberty, for anything all the time. But they just played a confidence game with us. They gave us pseudo democracies. They gave us media to inform us, and education, etc., etc. But it was all fake. It was all theater. They fed us the wrong stories, totally. And now it's coming to an end. From the one point, they have given us a tremendous opportunity with the internet, but they see it as temporary. This is like a fallout of their project, that during a time the people would be able to inform themselves very well. But once the project is in place, as they want it, that we will not be able to do that. We will not have access, or we will even be in prison. Yeah. Poor Yuri. I feel there's little we can do about it. But they will start to strangulate liberties. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just with the most basic things now, using the search engine 10, 15 years ago to using it now, and virtually all search engines now is the same. I don't see any difference. You just get completely garbage results that are the lies of the system and the mainstream media. Even my own podcast does not even appear on some at all. My website, nothing.
No, it's dramatic. It's dramatic what has happened on the internet. That's one way they try to reduce our access to good information. Yeah, it's very difficult to find anything.
If they don't like you, you don't exist in the system. And again, that goes back to the social credit what we're talking about. Is there? So we've covered a lot. Again, is there anything that we haven't brought up that you think is important, or any final thoughts for us?
Well, a big subject is the Jewish role in this whole project, and well, but it's a long story. I will be willing to explain it for the listeners, but I think it may be better in another interview, or if you are interested in it too. Well, you have read. I will also make a new article on this, because it's a very long and winding story that starts very early on in the Phoenician Empire. In the Phoenician Empire, because Jews and Phoenicians were identical at some point. And then they started to diverge, and that the split came with the Bible. The first five, the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first five Bible books were written in Alexandria by a team of experts 270 years before Christ. That's the result of a scholarly work by a guy named Russell Gmirkin. If you're halfway, you haven't got there yet in the book. But then a mythology is created to have the Jewish people believe that one day they will rule the world. And I know you are a Christian.
I was going to bring up again. My style on the podcast is that was one point of contention in your book. Now looking back, that I do disagree with. I take the Old Testament and the New Testament as the infallible word of God. But again, I have people with different views on the podcast, and I'm not here. I just let you. I let the listener make up their own mind and discern. So.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, it doesn't mean that everything that is in those five Bible books has to be thrown out too, because one of the big stories, of course, in these first Bible books is Genesis and the creation. Yeah, and that is a metaphor for what we were talking about. We do not come from below; we come from above. Yeah, so God, or a God, in my terminology, a God or a highly intelligent, unimaginable being has created the universe and life, and that's scientifically totally clear now.
But I think we could even have the same outcome as you're discussing, whether your explanation or whether we take it as the Torah, the Old Testament and New Testament as being from God. Still, the outcome can be that Jews or Israelis will have too high, an opinion, right, of themselves. Either way, I think that the outcome could still be the same, but we've gone, I think, an hour and a half or a little more, which is my upper limits for listeners' sake. But we could have you back again, because we've covered your big picture thesis of your book, Predators versus the Prey, and then we could have you back again for a more focus on that topic, which I haven't really treated on the podcast, and I know some listeners would like that, and so we'll have you back to do a deep dive on that. And so, any other any other final thought for us, and then where can people?
No, because then if there is a second interview, then we can also talk about what would be the future of Israel under these circumstances. It was a very important project during the American, stage or the American cycle of the project. But now, what is it going to be under the Chinese cycle of the project? So we can have all of these things in a second interview, if you like.
That's a good teaser. So people they'll want to know now for the next one. And where is the best place to is your Substack the best place to go to find you? What are your any projects you have?
Yeah, I'm only on Substack. I think I will keep it that way, because it starts to be confusing if you are on 5 different media and follow up everything. And I'd like to have it at one point. Yeah, that they can find general information on book and new articles, but not yet the one on Israel and on the other Brics countries. That's for the coming months. And yes, maybe until next time then.
All right, thank you, Mees. The link to your Substack is in the description, so people should go and subscribe and purchase your book. I think it's available through the Substack as well. And then we'll talk again when those articles come out, and we'll get your take on Israel and the future there.
Okay, thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.